I want to tell you about a painting that was hung in the wrong room. Not a famous painting, not the work of anyone the London art world had bothered to notice. Just a small watercolor, perhaps 14 inches wide, of a watermill in the Cotswolds at first light, the kind of painting that rewards the person who stands still long enough to look at it, and the woman who painted it, and the evening she spent standing quietly in the back of a room where her work had been placed, with great deliberateness, where no one would see it. Her name was Miss Cecily Drummond, 26 years old, drawing instructor to the daughters of Lady Alderton of Grosvenor Square. The position was respectable in the way positions held by women of reduced circumstances are respectable, which is to say, it was tolerated rather than honored. She had come to it 3 years earlier, after her father died. Her father had been a country clergyman with a large library, a generous mind, and an income that had not kept pace with either. When he was gone, there was the library, some modest debt, and a daughter who could draw with the kind of quiet precision that makes people stop and look twice, and who had nowhere particular to be. She had learned to make herself useful. She had learned to make herself quiet. These are not the same skill, though they are often required together, and Cecily Drummond had become very practiced at both. Now, my friends, before I tell you what happened at the Alderton exhibition, I need you to understand something about the evening as Lady Alderton had designed it, because nothing Lady Alderton arranged was accidental. The woman had been managing the social architecture of Grosvenor Square for 25 years, and she managed it the way a general manages a campaign. With forethought, with precision, and with a very clear idea of who was supposed to end up where. The exhibition was her eldest daughter's idea. Lady Grace Alderton, 22, and genuinely talented with watercolors, had suggested a small private showing for the family and their invited guests. Lady Alderton had agreed, seen the social utility in it, and expanded it considerably. She had solicited work from the daughters of 3 other good families. She had arranged the evening so that the Earl of Kestwick, Lord Stanwick, the Earl, who was the most consequential man she had invited, and the reason for the good wine and the extra footman, would be appropriately impressed by the refined tastes of her household. And she had included, at Lady Grace's insistence, and over her own quiet reservations, one small watercolor by Miss Drummond. She had included it in the anteroom, near the window that faced north, between the refreshment table and the door to the servants' passage, where guests would pass through on their way from the entrance hall to the main salon, and where, if the lighting held, someone might conceivably glance at it. This was not an accident. Lady Alderton did not make accidents. Cecily understood this the moment she arrived, and was directed by the housekeeper to the anteroom to see where her piece had been placed. She stood in front of it for a moment. The north light was flat and grey. The mill in the painting was doing its best, she thought, with the specific clarity of a woman who has had 3 years to understand exactly what she is in this household. That the placement was a message, and that the message was for the Earl, and that Lady Alderton was not wrong to send it. The message was simply, this is what Miss Drummond is. A drawing instructor, a member of the household staff who paints on her free afternoons, not the kind of person whose work belongs on the wall of the main salon. Cecily considered this for approximately 4 seconds. Then she went to find a cup of tea. She found instead Admiral Sir Basil Hartwell. He was standing in the anteroom with the specific expression of a man who has discovered that the anteroom is considerably quieter than the main salon, and who intends to remain there for the duration of the evening. He was 78 years old, retired from 30 years at sea, and nearly blind in his left eye since a skirmish off the Azores in 1803. He wore his medals because he always wore his medals, and he was examining Cecily's watercolor with the attention of a man accustomed to reading weather and water, and the precise quality of light at sea. "Is this yours?" he asked when she came to stand beside him. "It is," she said. "The light on the water is right," he said. Most people paint water wrong. They paint what they think water looks like rather than what it actually does. He tilted his head. You've been to this mill. Many times, she said. It was near where I grew up. He looked at her with the direct attention of a man who has spent his life making quick assessments of people on whom his life might depend. You know what you're looking at, then, not copying from someone else. No, she said. I only paint things I've seen. He appeared to find this satisfactory. Sit down, he said. If there's something to sit on, I want to ask you about the technique with the reflection. I've been trying to get water reflections right for 40 years and I haven't managed it. Cecily found 2 chairs, because there was in fact a settee near the refreshment table that no one else wanted, and Admiral Sir Basil Hartwell, retired, told her about 40 years of failed watercolor reflections, and she told him about the particular patience required to wait for the light to shift, and he told her about the North Atlantic, which he described with the specific affection of a man who had spent the better part of his life in its company. He was, she found, very good company. He was the kind of old man who had long since run out of patience for saying things he didn't mean, which meant that everything he said was worth hearing. The Earl of Kestwick arrived at the exhibition at 8:15. Lord Stanwick, the Earl, was 34 years old, recently returned from 2 years overseeing his family's holdings in the West Indies, and possessed of the particular expression of a man who has accepted a social invitation and is already conducting the arithmetic of the earliest polite departure. He moved through the main salon with the correctness of a man discharging an obligation, spoke to Lady Alderton with the manners of a guest who knows his own consequence and is not unkind about it, admired 2 paintings by Miss Forsyth, and said the appropriate things about Lady Grace's rather lovely study of the Alderton garden in autumn. Then he noticed the anteroom. Not immediately. He had been standing near the fireplace in the main salon, attending to a conversation about the current session of Parliament that required only 1/4 of his attention when he became aware, with the peripheral awareness of a man who notices things, that the anteroom to his left contained 2 people engaged in what appeared to be an actual conversation, not the performed conversation of a drawing room. The other kind. He looked. There was an old man he recognized as Admiral Hartwell, who he had not expected to find genuinely talking to anyone at a Grosvenor Square exhibition, and beside him, a young woman with dark hair and a stillness about her that was not the stillness of someone waiting to be noticed, but the stillness of someone who was entirely occupied with whatever she was doing. He watched for a moment. Then he returned his attention to Parliament. It was during the 2nd hour of the evening that Lady Corwin made her remark. Lady Corwin was a woman of precisely calibrated social position who had a gift for saying damaging things in the tone of someone sharing neutral information. She said it in the main salon, in the center of a cluster of guests, in the particular voice of a woman who believes she is providing a service. She had heard something, she said, about Lady Grace's Tuesday excursion. She hoped it was nothing, she said, but she had seen, or rather a friend had seen. She revised, with the smile of someone making the revision for legal rather than factual reasons, Lady Grace at Hollowell's Lending Library on the east side of Piccadilly. Which was nothing in itself, she said. But the gentleman accompanying her was understood to be a Mr. Rafferty, not the respectable Mr. Rafferty, she clarified, with the precision of a woman who knows exactly what she is doing, but the other one, the one whose name had been mentioned in connection with a rather unfortunate business last spring. The room went quiet in the specific way of rooms that have just received information designed to travel. Lady Grace went the color of the wall behind her. Lady Alderton began assembling a response with the rapid competence of a woman who has navigated social crises before and knows the first 30 seconds determine everything. 2 of the other guests found reasons to look at the paintings on the wall. 3 of them looked at Lady Grace. Cecily was in the doorway of the anteroom. She had heard it. Admiral Hartwell had not. He had been in the middle of a description of a storm off the Cape of Good Hope, and his left ear was the bad one. But Cecily had heard every word, because she had been facing the main salon, and the room had gone quiet enough that Lady Corwin's voice carried clearly. She knew the truth. She knew it because she had been there. She had accompanied Lady Grace to Hollowell's on a Tuesday, but not last Tuesday, and not with a Mr. Rafferty of any variety. 3 weeks prior, on a Tuesday afternoon, when Lady Grace's French lesson had been cancelled, Cecily had walked with to return 2 novels and was not permitted to walk on Piccadilly unaccompanied, and the footman had the afternoon off. The gentleman who had greeted Lady Grace at the library was her cousin, Mr. Alderton. Lady Grace's own cousin, visiting from Bath, whose Christian name happened to also be Geoffrey, which meant that if you squinted hard enough at the situation and were disposed to squint, you could construct a confusion between him and any other Mr. Geoffrey in London, including a Mr. Geoffrey Rafferty, who Cecily knew only by reputation, and who had not been in Hollowell's that afternoon. She knew he had not been there because she had been there. She had the book Lady Grace had borrowed still on the lesson room shelf. She felt in the specific and inconvenient way of a person who knows the truth about something being made publicly false, the particular pull of information that requires to be said. She said it. From the anteroom doorway, in the clear and even voice of someone offering a factual correction. I believe Lady Corwin may be thinking of a different occasion. I accompanied Lady Grace to Hollowell's 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday afternoon. The gentleman who greeted her was her cousin, Mr. Geoffrey Alderton, who was visiting from Bath. I have Lady Grace's borrowed volume in the lesson room now, if the date stamp would be useful. The Mr. Rafferty that Lady Corwin has described was not present. She paused. I mention it only because I was there, and the account as given is not accurate. 30 people in a room received this correction. There was a silence of the second kind. Not the silence of people who have heard something damaging, but the silence of people who have received a correction so specific and so calm that it has arrived before the damage could take hold, and who are now, collectively, processing the revision. Lady Grace looked at Cecily from across the room, with an expression that was not quite relief, and not quite gratitude, but something that contained both of them, and went past them to something more particular. Lady Corwin recovered. She was good at recovering. It was perhaps her primary social skill. She looked at Cecily down the length of the main salon, with the expression of a woman making a recalibration. She said, with the particular ease of someone delivering a verdict rather than making a reentitious. The drawing instructor maintains a record of the family's social calendar. Now, my friends, I want you to understand what the room did with that sentence. Because the room had a choice. It could accept Lady Corwin's framing, the drawing instructor, the record keeper, the servant who had overstepped, and allow the evening to rearrange itself around that framing. Or it could do something else. The room was in the process of deciding. The Earl of Kestwick was standing near the fireplace. He had been standing there for approximately 3 minutes, attending to nothing, watching the anteroom doorway, listening with the complete attention of a man who has very good ears and the patience to use them. He had heard Lady Corwin's original remark. He had heard Cecily's correction. He had heard Lady Corwin's response. He set down his wine-glass. He walked into the anteroom. He did it without any visible deliberation, with the composure of a man who has assessed a situation and arrived at the only adequate response, and has no interest in discussing the matter beforehand. He walked past Admiral Hartwell, who had been watching the main salon doorway with the sharp attention of a man who may be nearly blind in one eye but is not deaf, and who had, Cecily realized, heard and understood considerably more of the preceding exchange than she had credited him with. The Earl stood in front of the watercolor of the Cotswolds Mill. He looked at it for a moment. Then he lifted it carefully from the wall. He held it the way a man holds something he intends to carry somewhere and intends to arrive with it intact. He carried it into the main salon. Every person in the room watched him carry it. He walked to the interior wall of the salon, the wall with the best light, the wall where Lady Alderton had placed the two largest and most important works of the evening, and he hung Cecily's watercolor there. He had to move a seascape by Miss Caldwell, 3 inches to the left to do it, which he did with complete composure and without apology. He stepped back. He looked at it on the wall, in the good light, where it could be seen. Then he turned to the room. And he said, not to Lady Corwin, not to Lady Alderton, not to the 30 assembled guests, but to Cecily, across the length of the salon, in the voice of a man who has made a decision and is entirely prepared to explain it. Miss Drummond, I understand you painted this from life. I'd like to know about the mill, if you're willing to tell me. The room did not know, in that moment, what to do with itself. Admiral Sir Basil Hartwell, who had appeared in the anteroom doorway during the walk across the salon, looked at the Earl with the expression of a man who has revised his opinion of someone upward, significantly and suddenly. He said, to no one in particular, "Good light on that wall. Should have been there from the start." Cecily walked across the salon. She stood beside her painting in the good light, and she told Lord Stanwick about the mill. She told him about the way the water behaved in early morning, before the miller arrived, when the wheel was still, and the surface of the mill pond held the sky. She told him about the particular difficulty of painting moving water by looking at it long enough that it became still in your mind. And the color of limestone in first light, which is not grey and not gold, but something in between that most people paint wrong because they mix it from logic rather than observation. He listened with the attention of a man who is not listening to be polite. The room rearranged itself around them. Not all at once, and not without difficulty. Lady Alderton's expression during those first minutes was the expression of a woman encountering a variable she had not planned for, and Lady Corwin had the grace to require a great deal of attention from her own wine-glass. But the room found its new arrangement, as rooms do when the most powerful person in them has made his position clear, and by the time the conversation about the mill had widened to include Admiral Hartwell's thoughts on coastal light and the particular quality of British waterways in autumn, the evening had a different centre of gravity than the one Lady Alderton had designed. Cecily noticed at some point in the second hour that she was standing in the best light in the room. She thought, with the careful precision she brought to every observation, "He moved my painting." She thought that was not a small thing. She thought, do not make it larger than it is. She was not, she found, entirely successful. After the guests had gone, in the corridor near the servants' staircase, Cecily was collecting her wrap from the housekeeper's cupboard when Lord Stanwick found her. He appeared from the direction of the library, which had not been open to guests that evening, which meant he had taken a particular route. "Miss Drummond," he said. She turned. He was standing in the corridor with the expression she had seen at the exhibition. Not the social management of the main salon, but the other one, the one he had worn when he carried the painting across the room. "My lord," she said. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Lady Corwin, what you said." She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "I did." He was quiet for a moment. "Why?" he said. She considered this. She had asked herself the same question twice in the preceding 2 hours, in the specific way of a person who has done a thing and is now examining the reasoning. "Because Lady Grace had done nothing wrong," she said. "The account was false and the falseness was harmful, and I was in a position to correct it. I was there. I have the date in my lesson calendar and the borrowed book on the shelf." She paused. "The position I hold in this household does not disqualify me from knowing the truth." He looked at her. The corridor was quiet. The sounds of the drawing room, where the remaining guests were performing the social restoration of the evening, came faintly through two closed doors. Most people would have let it pass, he said. I know, she said. I found I couldn't. He said, I noticed you before Lady Corwin spoke, in the anteroom, with Admiral Hartwell. She was still. He has not talked at any length at a social gathering in 2 years, he said. I know because I have known him for 15 years and I have watched it happen. He stands in corners at these things and people hand him wine, and no one asks him anything. She looked at the floor briefly, then at Lord Stanwick. He knows things worth knowing, she said, about water, about light. He has 40 years of observations about the sea. He does, the Earl said, with a quality of warmth that was different from the social manner of the main salon. Most people don't take the time to find that out. She said nothing. He said, You moved my painting. He looked at her. I moved your painting. Why? She said. It was the same question he had asked her, and she meant it the same way. He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the directness of a man who has considered whether to say a thing and decided that not saying it is the worse option. Because Lady Corwin said what she said, and you said what you said, and the correct response to those two events in sequence was not to remain in the main salon doing nothing, and because your work had been placed in the anteroom by the refreshment table, by a woman who placed it there on purpose. And I had been content to observe that for 2 hours, and I found I had run out of patience with myself for it. She looked at him. I would like to call tomorrow, he said, if you're willing. She understood what this meant. She was not a woman who misread things. I am a drawing instructor, she said. Lady Alderton placed my painting where she placed it deliberately. A call from you will not trouble you, but it will make the situation here considerably more complicated for me specifically. I know, he said. She will not be pleased. No, he said, she will not. He looked at her with the direct, full attention of a man who has done the arithmetic and is presenting the answer. I am not asking Lady Alderton. She thought about the north window and the refreshment table, and 2 hours of Admiral Hartwell's knowledge of the sea. She thought about the painting, now hanging in the good light on the main salon wall. She thought about the specific quality of a man who carries a thing across a room full of watching people, and hangs it on the wall and does not explain himself. She said, 10 o'clock, I have a lesson at noon. He said, 10 o'clock. She went up the stairs. He went back down the corridor. Behind 2 closed doors, the drawing room continued its restoration of the evening's norms, and neither of them was inside it. He came at 10 o'clock. Lady Alderton had received the news of his intended call that morning with the expression of a woman encountering an obstacle she had not planned for. She had, in the drawing room the previous evening, attempted to arrange the explanation. The Earl was being charitable. The Earl had misunderstood the placement. The Earl was simply kind to servants. She had watched Lady Corwin's face cross the room and understood that the explanation was not taking hold in the way she had intended. She directed the housekeeper to show the Earl to the drawing room and sent word to Cecily that she would receive the call herself. Cecily, who had anticipated this, was in the lesson room at 9:10, completing the morning's preparation. She sent word back through the housekeeper that she would be available in the lesson room as her noon student sometimes arrived early and the lesson materials required attention. The Earl's card was brought to the lesson room at 10:10. He was shown in. Cecily was at the drawing table when he entered. The large table by the east window, where she kept the students' portfolios, the reference books, the careful arrangements of pencils and brushes that marked the room as a place where actual work was done. She had been reviewing the week's lesson plans with the methodical calm of a woman who knows how to occupy herself usefully while waiting. She looked up when he came in. "My lord," she said. "Miss Drummond." He looked around the lesson room, the good east light, the portfolios on the shelves, the painting studies pinned to the board, the particular ordered comfort of a room where someone has made real work their home. "Lady Alderton is not in the drawing room," he said. "No," she said. "Were you expecting her to be?" "Yes," she said without apology. "You arranged to be elsewhere." "I arranged to be where I am supposed to be at this hour," she said, "which is the lesson room. The drawing room was her arrangement, not mine." He was quiet for a moment, and then the quality she had been trying to name since the previous evening, not exactly admiration, but the thing that contains admiration and exceeds it into something more specific, settled across his expression. "How long have you been doing that?" he said, navigating without appearing to navigate. She looked at the table. "Since I arrived," she said, "Lady Alderton arranged the household carefully. I found the most sensible approach was to do my work and remain in my own domain as much as possible. And, last night—" She was quiet for a moment. "Last night was different," she said. "What Lady Corwin said was not about me. It was about Lady Grace, who has been genuinely kind to me in ways that were not required of her and that Lady Alderton did not encourage." She looked at him directly. "I could not allow a kind person's reputation to be damaged by a false account simply because the correct account required me to speak from the wrong side of the room." He looked at her for a long moment. "The wrong side of the room," he said, as though placing the phrase somewhere he intended to return to. "I understand why my painting was placed where it was placed," she said. "I am not without resources when it comes to understanding my own position. But understanding a thing does not mean consenting to every consequence it is meant to produce." He said, "What consequence was it meant to produce?" She considered whether to be entirely honest. She decided she had not gotten this far by managing her honesty. "To remind you," she said, "of what I am in this household." He was very still. "And what you are in this household," he said, "does not determine what I think of you." "No," she said, "but it determines what Lady Alderton believes you think of me, which has been the more operationally significant factor, until last night." He looked at her with the expression she had first seen when he lifted the painting from the anteroom wall. "You are very precise," he said. "I have found it useful," she said. He said, "May I ask, your father, you paint from life, you said. The instruction you give your students is not the instruction of someone who learned from books. Where did you study?" She was quiet for a moment. "My father was a clergyman in the Cotswolds with a great deal of time and a genuine interest in natural philosophy," she said. "He believed that a daughter who could see accurately was better prepared than one who could merely look decoratively. He was not wrong about that. He died 3 years ago, before things were otherwise arranged." She paused. "The position is not what he imagined for me, but it has given me a lesson room with good east light, and Admiral Hartwell's 40 Years of the Sea, and last night an interesting exhibition." He looked at her with the warmth she had been managing within appropriate limits since the corridor. "It was," he said, "the most interesting exhibition I have attended in several years. My friends, I will tell you what happened in the weeks that followed, though I will not make it longer than it needs to be, because this is not a story about weeks. It is a story about a painting and a corridor and a man who made a decision." He called the following Thursday. He sent a volume on Flemish watercolor technique with a note that said, precisely, that he had found the chapter on depicting moving water relevant to a conversation they had had and wished her to have it. He attended a lecture at the Royal Academy on the same evening she was in attendance, which was not a coincidence. And both of them understood it was not a coincidence. He did not manage his attentions diplomatically. He was, she understood, being deliberate. The household rearranged itself around this clarity. The senior housemaid began bringing Cecily's morning tea tray with slightly better china. Lady Grace appeared more frequently in the lesson room doorway, sometimes with questions about technique and sometimes without any stated reason, and was on every occasion welcome. The footman, who had previously made himself absent when Geoffrey Alderton appeared near the lesson room, developed an equal and opposite urgency to be present on the Earl's visit mornings. Geoffrey Alderton was not much in evidence during those weeks. He had his club. He had, Cecily understood, performed the calculation of a man who has realized that what he did not protect has been protected by someone with considerably more authority, and that his own position in that calculation has become genuinely uncomfortable. Physical relocation was his most graceful remaining option. Lady Alderton arranged one dinner during those weeks to which the Earl was invited. He attended. He was entirely correct in his social manner. He sat where he was placed. Cecily's seat at dinner was not by any means the best seat at the table, but it was not the worst either. Because Lady Alderton was a practical woman beneath the social conviction, and the practical arithmetic had shifted. It was Lady Alderton who sought Cecily out the morning after that dinner. She came to the lesson room, sat in the student's chair, the chair the Earl had occupied 6 weeks prior, and looked at Cecily with the expression of a woman who has been managing a situation and has arrived at the point where management requires something more difficult than management. "The Earl of Kestwick," she said. "Yes," Cecily said. "His family," Lady Alderton said, "will have requirements." "I know," Cecily said. "I am aware of what his family would require in a match. I am also aware of what I am in this household. I do not believe you need to explain either of these things to me." Lady Alderton looked at her. For the first time in 3 years, the expression on her face was not the expression of social management. It was the expression of a woman who has encountered something that has exceeded her architecture. "He moved your painting," Lady Alderton said. "Yes," Cecily said. "In 25 years," Lady Alderton said, "I have never seen a man of his position do anything like it." Cecily said nothing. Lady Alderton was quiet for a moment. Then, with the specific dignity of a woman arriving at a conclusion she had not planned to arrive at, "He will call on Thursday. I will ensure the drawing room is available." She stood. She smoothed her dress. It was not an apology. Lady Alderton was not a woman who produced apologies, but it was the concession of a woman who has been managing rooms for 25 years and has just met a factor that does not respond to management, and who is honest enough to know it. Cecily said, "Thank you." He came on a Tuesday, not a Thursday, which meant it was not a social call. He came at 11 in the morning with the expression of a man who has been thinking carefully for several weeks and has arrived at the point past which careful thinking is no longer the right instrument. He was shown to the drawing room. He spoke with Lady Alderton for 20 minutes. Cecily was told afterward that it was a thorough conversation, not without resistance, not without the kind of difficulty that 25 years of social conviction produces, but ending, as conversations with the Earl tended to end, at the conclusion he had intended when he sat down. Then he was shown to the lesson room. She was at the drawing table. She had known he was coming, not because she had been told, but because she had been paying attention for 6 weeks, and she understood by now the shape of his decisions. He came in. He sat in the student's chair. He said, "Lady Alderton has agreed to write to your guardian." She set down the pencil she was holding. She looked at him. "My father's brother," she said, "is in Derbyshire. He was appointed my guardian when my father died, though we have had little occasion to be in contact." "I know," he said. "I intend to travel there next week if he will receive me." She said, "You are moving quickly." "I have found," he said, "that when I am certain about a thing, I am not content to manage it slowly." He looked at her with the honest, direct attention that had been, from the anteroom to the corridor to the lesson room, the most consistent thing about him. "I am certain about this." She said, "What are you certain about specifically?" He said, with the precision that was his whole character, "I am certain that I spent an evening at an exhibition beside an old man who had been put in the wrong room by a woman who did not think it mattered, and that the only other person who thought it mattered was the woman whose painting had been put there with him. I am certain that when that woman was told in front of 30 people that her knowing the truth was an overreach of her station, the thing I most wanted to do was demonstrate, with some clarity, that it was not. He paused. I am certain that in the weeks since, I have not had a conversation as interesting as the one we had about water and light, and that I have tried. He looked at her, and I am certain that I would like her to be something other than a drawing instructor, if she is willing. Cecily looked at him. She thought about the north window and the refreshment table and Admiral Hartwell's 40 years, and the painting now back in the lesson room. Lady Alderton had returned it without comment, which was its own kind of statement. She thought about the note on Flemish watercolour technique and the Royal Academy lecture, and 6 weeks of a man being deliberately, uncomplicatedly clear. She said, "You should know that I will not be easily managed." I had suspected, he said. And I will have opinions about the estate and the household, and anything I believe I have useful thoughts about. I have been quiet in this house because the situation required it. That is not my natural mode. I had gathered that, he said, from Lady Corwin's correction. Something shifted in her face. The thing she had been not quite permitting herself for 6 weeks. The full particular warmth of caring about someone who has, without announcement, done the thing that was required. You moved my painting, she said. Not to him, almost to herself. The sentence she had been carrying since the exhibition. He looked at her. I moved your painting. Yes, she said, you did. She said yes. To the letter to Derbyshire, to the intention, to the honest arrangement, that was not an arrangement at all. But the straightforward choice of 2 people who had found each other in the wrong room and had decided, separately and then together, that the distance between them was not the right distance. She left Alderton House on a Thursday morning in February. She carried the lesson portfolios she had assembled over 3 years, the volume on Flemish watercolour technique, with the note folded inside it, and her father's field sketchbook, which she had kept in the lesson room drawer since the day she arrived. She asked Lady Grace for the date stamp from the borrowed Hollowell's novel. Evidence of a Tuesday that had mattered. And Lady Grace had said, of course, obviously, and had embraced her in the lesson room doorway, and said she was sorry she had not done more. Cecily had said there was nothing to be sorry for. She had meant it. Admiral Sir Basil Hartwell sent a note the morning she left. It said, I have told my housekeeper about the water and the light. She says she will try it your way. I will send word of the results. B.H. She folded it into the sketchbook. The Earl was at the front of the house with the carriage. He had come himself, not sent the carriage but come, which was a statement that required no elaboration. He handed her in. He got in beside her. The carriage moved. She looked out the window at Alderton House as it grew smaller. The windows, the lesson room on the 2nd floor, the east light she had worked in for 3 years. She felt the specific weight of a chapter correctly closed. He said beside her, Admiral Hartwell's Azores skirmish. You mentioned he lost his eye there. I never knew the details. He will tell you, she said. If you ask him directly and have time enough, it takes about an hour and is worth every minute. I intend to find out, he said. We will call on him in the spring. She looked at him. You intend to call on Admiral Hartwell? Regularly, he said. He has been standing in corners at these things for 2 years, and no one has been asking him the right questions. That seems like a correctable situation. She looked at him with the full warmth she had stopped managing weeks ago. It does, she said. The carriage turned into the street. London opened around them. The grey February morning, the lamplight still visible in the windows, the city doing what cities do. And inside it, 2 people who had found each other in the wrong room sat in the particular ease of a shared direction, which was the most comfortable thing Cecily Drummond had felt in 3 years of careful management. She thought, he moved my painting. She thought, I am glad of it. And perhaps that is why I keep this story close, my friends, not because a false remark was corrected, or a woman was defended, or a household rearranged itself around a new arithmetic, but because a man at an exhibition full of people, performing the social mathematics of rank and position, walked into a room where something had been placed on purpose in the wrong light, picked it up without a word, carried it past everyone who was watching, and put it where it belonged. No speech, no declaration, just the deliberate movement of a thing that deserved better. She had stood in the north light for 2 hours, and kept an old admiral company, and told the truth from the wrong side of the room. She had done it without anyone's permission, and from no position of authority. He had noticed. He had moved her painting. Sometimes that is all love is. 2 people in a room where one of them has been placed where she should not be, and the other one deciding that the correct response to that is not to remain where he was put either. If this story found you tonight, friends, then you already know what I mean, and if it's your first time here at Moonlight at Marlowe, welcome. Subscribe and come back for the next story. Every love here is hard won. Every ending is deserved.